All right, it looks like we've got quite a few people here. It's 6:01, so I think we'll get started. But before we do, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which this meeting is taking place. I know that we're all dialing in from different locations. I'm in Sydney tonight, so I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal and Bidjigal peoples of the Eora Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So for those of you who haven't been to one of our webinars before, my name's Vanessa and I work in the shareholder engagement team. And I'm joined here tonight by lovely Emma. And we're both joined tonight by our very special guest, Fiona, who is a company analyst in the climate and environment team at ACCR. I know there's a few familiar names in there, but for those of you who are new, ACCR is a shareholder and advocacy and research organisation, and you'll get a taste of both those different areas in tonight's webinar. So in the first half, Fiona is going to talk about our recent research into superannuation. And then in the second half, Emma will go into shareholder advocacy and how you can get involved in our work as a shareholder. And for those of you who have attended previously, you'll know that the webinar is split into two distinct sections. So if you are already familiar with our work, you may want to stay for just the first half, or if not, you might want to stay for the first and second half. And just a little bit of housekeeping, this webinar is being recorded. We usually upload it to our YouTube channel the following day. And you'll see that there's a Q&A chat down below. So if you have questions, please pop them in there. We'll have ample time for you to have a bit of Q&A with us at the end of the first half as well as the second half. But if you do have questions during the presentation, feel free to type them in and we can try get to them while we talk as well. So without further ado, I'm going to pass on to Fiona to get started.
Thank you, Vanessa. Hi, everyone. My name is Fiona. I'm a company analyst here at ACCR, and I'm also the lead author of our newest report, Super Votes. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners from the land on which I'm coming to you today, and that is the Yuggera and Turrbal people here in Brisbane and Queensland. And I wish to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So Super Votes is a third annual report by ACCR on the proxy voting behaviour of Australia's 50 largest superannuation funds. And through these reports, ACCR has analysed the shareholder proposals relating to environmental, social and governance issues, or ESG issues, filed at 307 companies since 2017. And this research follows from our previous proxy voting reports, 2 steps forward, 1 step back in 2020, and Vote Like You Mean It in 2019. Thank you. So what exactly is proxy voting? If you're not aware, so shareholders in listed companies are entitled to vote on resolutions, otherwise known as proposals, put to company meetings. Proposals put forward by shareholders often address these ESG issues, and generally they're beyond the scope of general business. In many jurisdictions, including Australia, shareholder proposals are not binding. And that means that the board doesn't necessarily have to take on those actions for these issues. However, they can provide a useful poll of shareholders' opinions on those specific issues. They are also an important way to communicate concerns to company management, particularly where existing engagement is proving ineffective. Now, with the enormous hardships that have been associated with the Australian bushfires, with COVID-19 and the loss of cultural heritage sites, ESG issues are now at the forefront of investment discussions, and this has moved the conversation beyond the application and integration of ESG principles in value creation and into strategies such as active ownership principles to drive real-world change. So what is active ownership? That refers to the use of the rights and position of ownership to influence the activity or behaviour of investee companies through things like dialogue, engagement, and in particular, proxy voting. Proxy voting represents a persuasive, robust, and easily accessible instrument in the stewardship toolkit and helps to facilitate that two-way accountability. Now, ESG issues are extremely relevant to super fund members and the society in which they live in and will retire into. And therefore, it's extremely important that super funds engage with companies using these 3 pillars of active ownership with their members' interests in mind. So the overall aim of our report was to highlight the disclosure and voting practices of the 50 largest superannuation funds in Australia, in particular emphasising the importance of good disclosure as a measure of accountability to members, consistent voting as a measure of proper governance and a fund's diligence with respect to proxy voting, and to highlight the consonance between how a fund positions itself in theory. So for example, as an investor, which is sensitive to issues such as sustainability, and how it votes in practice. So what do? We examined the publicly available proxy voting records of Australia's 50 largest super funds, and we gathered data between 2017 and 2020 in 5 jurisdictions. So that included Australia, Canada, Norway, the UK, and the US. And we pulled 959 shareholder proposals relating to those ESG issues. We collated all of that information and we ended up sending individual fund voting records to each of the super funds we analysed to verify the data. So our report is actually quite large and we don't have all night, unfortunately. So I'm going to take you through some of the key and interesting findings that we found of our report. So Australia's largest 50 super funds control $1.9 trillion in assets under management. And of that, the top 5 control nearly 50% of all of APRA regulated assets under management. And for those that don't know, APRA stands for the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, and they are the independent statutory authority that supervises institutions across banking, insurance, and super. In terms of disclosure, only less than half of the 50 super funds that we examined disclosed complete voting records, at 22 of them. We found that industry super funds most often had a complete record, and signatories to the Australian Asset Owner Stewardship Code were most likely to have a complete voting record. Here we compared the number of shareholder proposals and shareholder support for proposals in each of the jurisdictions we analysed. And we found that 80% of all of the shareholder proposals we saw were put to US companies, and that was followed by 10% in Canada and 9% in Australia. We also saw that the number of shareholder proposals increased year on year, and the levels of support increased quite dramatically between 2017 and 2018, however, dropped slightly in 2019 and has since plateaued in 2020. Okay, and then we looked at the support for ESG proposals by the Australian super funds over the 4 years we examined, so that's between 2017 and 2020. And we found that one fund supported more than 75% of all of the ESG proposals. And that fund was Local Government Super, who have now rebranded to Active Super. There was a further 8 funds that supported more than 50% of shareholder proposals, and that was Vision Super, Hester, Cbus, Macquarie, NGS Super, Mercer, Australian Super, and Qantas Super. Here we looked at how Australian super funds voted at Australian listed companies compared to how they voted at US listed companies. And what we found is nearly all of the super funds that we examined supported more proposals at US companies than in Australian companies. There might be a multitude of reasons for this, mainly probably because of direct access to the boards in Australia. So super funds might not want to rock the boat and lose that access to the board, whereas they lack that access to the boards in the US and therefore are more likely to engage using proxy voting. Then we went to look at the different themes for the ESG items. And when we looked at climate change, most super funds, or about 61% of them, increased their support for climate-related proposals over the 4 years we examined. In fact, in 2020, NGS Super and Vision Super supported 100% and 95% of climate-related proposals, respectively. And interestingly, 6 funds did not support any climate-related proposals, but I'm not going to name and shame. When we looked at the governance proposals, these proposals made up nearly half, or 48%, of all of the shareholder resolutions between 2017 and 2020. In 2020, 8 of the top 20 shareholder proposals by average support were governance related, and the majority of these proposals related to lobbying or election spending. In fact, lobbying proposals garnered the highest average shareholder support of all the proposal types, including climate. And overall, the support from Australian super funds was 66%, which is quite high. And then we looked at social proposals, which is the last of the ESG terms. And these cover gender equity, animal welfare, health, human rights, labour and media issues. What we found was 2020 marked an unprecedented level of support for social proposals. So in the past, these garnered very little shareholder support. 35% of all of the ESG shareholder proposals in 2020 were social. And we found that gender equity, health and media issues represented the most supported resolutions by Australian super funds. So this last finding I'm going to take you through is a really interesting one. It's to do with what's termed Trojan horse proposals. So these proposals imitate normal shareholder proposals, one similar to that ACCR might produce, but instead it flips it on its head and is instead critical of companies' progressive efforts on ESG issues. And in fact, they aim to derail those efforts. So in the past 3 years, Trojan horses have been garnering more support with 11 Trojan horse proposals in 2020. Now, the majority of those were about equal employment opportunity risks. So they argued that individuals with conservative viewpoints may face discrimination, and others asked for companies to disclose their board's ideological perspectives as a measure of diversity. But the three that I've highlighted here are the most interesting. So one of them is a resolution that was put to Chevron, which is a massive oil and gas company in America. And that was put forward by the National Center for Public Policy Research, which is a US conservative think tank. And they proposed that Chevron should be proud of its lobbying and its trade associations and encourage them to disclose the benefits of involving those groups that advocate for smaller government, lower taxes, and free market reforms. Interestingly, this got 28.6% shareholder support, and 7 of the super funds that we analysed voted in favour of this resolution. The other 2 resolutions were put forward by a man named Stephen Malloy. He's an ex-tobacco lobbyist, a Fox News commentator, and co-founder of the Burn More Coal activist shareholder group, which is established to prevent the closure of coal power plants. So he requested to ExxonMobil and Xcel Energy to disclose what's called a greenwashing audit. And that sounds good, but actually he wanted to know how much these companies waste in putting money into reducing their emissions. Now, these resolutions weren't as successful, gaining 4.1% and 3.3% respectively. But it should be noted that Vision Super actually voted in favour of the ExxonMobil and the Chevron resolution, despite being quite a sustainably minded fund. And this highlights the need for investors to interrogate the integrity and quality of the research and the arguments presented in shareholder resolutions. At the end of our report, we have a plethora of recommendations, and I'm going to just take you through the key recommendations. And they are that all funds should disclose their entire proxy voting record, every proposal, every meeting in all jurisdictions. Funds should vote consistently with their own investment and proxy voting policies, and those policies should be published and publicly available. Funds should consider the interests of their members when voting for shareholder proposals, and funds should vote consistently across jurisdictions. I might leave it there, Emma, and welcome to take any questions.
We've got one question, Fiona, about why we're not naming and shaming the 6 companies.
That's in the report. Yeah, no particular reason. That's not what the report is about. It's not naming and shaming. It's to highlight who does good and to encourage other funds to do good as well.
We'll circulate the full report for everybody afterwards as well.
And just another question. When we write to our super funds to divest and they say we prefer to engage, what should our follow-up question be?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I would ask them about what they do when they engage with these companies and what tools in their stewardship toolkit they use to engage, and whether they have any actionable responses, whether the company has taken action based on those engagements.
Thank you. And I think that's all the questions we have.
Hold on, I have sorry to butt in.
No, go ahead.
I have a bonus answer to what Fiona just said. I think something that we think about at ACCR is about divestment being the last resort and kind of the last step in your investor toolkit. And before you divest, you should be engaging, looking at how you vote on shareholder proposals, talking with other investors. There's a kind of whole suite of options that are available to you as a super fund and such a large investor. And I think it's important that a fund can demonstrate that they have made use of those tools. Because Fiona, what was the report that we put out a little while ago? Was that cutting carbon?
Yes, that's right.
We talked about that. So we might put that in our email follow-up to all of you as well, because that's a really interesting report looking at kind of who is making use of these tools and in what order. If there aren't any other questions, I have a sneaky bonus one. What does a complete proxy voting record look like?
That's a good question. I can tell you what an incomplete proxy voting record is, and that does not include numerous large public companies in which the fund has disclosed in the relevant period. It does not include votes where including all of the managers. So funds may have multiple investment managers, and so they might not disclose all of the records for those different managers. And some funds only contain a summary of how they voted in the year. So that also is incomplete. And where the fund hasn't disclosed anything, that's also an incomplete voting record.
Fiona, we've just had another question come in. Yep. Where do we find the proxy voting records for a super fund?
That's a good question. It's actually not standard on any of the different websites of super fund websites. Generally, it'll be in governance, but they might have a search function. And if you type in proxy voting, that should come up. That's how I found most of them.
Right. And just another question, how can super fund members get their super fund to disclose their voting record?
I would say pressure them, email them and talk to them. I think it's good social governance to disclose their proxy voting record and ensure that it aligns with their policies.
And I think that leads very well into how you can actually use your shareholder power, which Emma will get to next. But if there's no more questions for Fiona is actually going to leave us here. If you do have any more questions, please feel free to email either Fiona or the shareholder inbox that was on that you'll see in the next slides, and we can pass that on to Fiona as well. So another big thank you to Fiona for joining us tonight. And now Emma will pass on to you to get started on the shareholder advocacy.
Indeed, thank you. Sorry, I just flipped the slide forward, but it didn't have the shareholder inbox address, but it will pop up again soon. So before I start, I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that I'm speaking to you from, which is the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people in the ACT. So what we're going to talk about in this part of the webinar, so as Vanessa mentioned, if you're an existing shareholder or you've heard this part before, please feel free to jump off. But if you're new to our work or new to understanding what shareholder rights are and how you can make use of them, please stay around. I'll do my best to answer any questions as we're going. Ooh, sorry, a little bug just came and flew in my face while we're going. Otherwise, we'll have time for questions at the end as well. So what I'd like to cover is a little bit more about ACCR shareholder advocacy and how you can work with us as a shareholder, the different ways that you might hold shares, so as opposed to super, as Fiona was talking about, or direct ownership, how you might register your shares with us to participate in resolutions, what the agency agreement that facilitates that is and what that looks like, what participating in resolutions looks like as well, that cycle and what you might expect, and then other ways that you can work with us or support our work if you don't hold shares. So a little bit more about what we do here at ACCR. As Vanessa said up top, we are a research and shareholder advocacy organisation. So what Fiona shared with us just before is one of our core research outputs. We also do deep dives on our different thematic areas, which are climate and environment, workers' rights. We recently had our colleague Katie on, who was speaking about the launch of a report looking at labour hire in ASX listed companies. We also look at cultural heritage protection, and our colleague James will have on later in the year, does work on that. And we also look at gender and safety in the workplace. So we'll produce different research and analysis on those topics, and that informs our shareholder advocacy work. So our focus is on Australian listed companies. And again, we use that research and analysis to inform what our company engagement might look like. So we ourselves are shareholders in a lot of different ASX listed companies, and that opens up a lot of doors to us to start engaging with companies on these issues and then putting them on the annual general meeting for all investors to look at. So what we're looking for is more people who, like us, are interested in ESG issues, but who also hold shares in ASX listed companies. And when Vanessa and I are doing our work, reaching out to shareholders, we come up with a lot of people who care about these issues, but might not necessarily be shareholders. And then that might be something that we talk with them about. Or we meet a lot of people who hold shares and want to learn more about what their ownership power can unlock for them. And then the little overlap of people who hold both shares and are interested in our issues, it's quite simple to sign up your shares on our website and participate in our work, but we will get to that. So I'd just like to, before we get onto the shareholder hub and talk about that more specifically, one of our shareholders who participates in a number of our resolutions, her name is Holly. She's also an artist, put together this comic strip for us, and it explains our work, but from the perspective of a shareholder. So if you own shares and they might be in your name or your super fund or a family trust, and in this example, it's a couple that work with a financial advisor, and you have an interest in making returns for your retirement or for whatever reason, everybody needs money, and you want to align that with your values, you can do that through participating in shareholder resolutions with us. So when you find out about us and then you register your shares, we in the background are doing the research, such as what Fiona described. We're meeting with companies. I can't remember how many it is, but we meet with over 50, getting up to 100 ASX listed companies over the course of a year. We are connected with affected community, and that's more so in the S issues of ESG, so our cultural heritage, our workers' rights, and our human rights work. We have a lot of different partners that will come to us with particular issues that are linked to ASX listed companies. And then Vanessa and I in particular do all the work of, once you've registered shares with us, we take care of all the paperwork. So we're doing that in the background to file a resolution. And once that resolution appears on the notice of meeting, we then are able to meet with all the other investors in that company to speak to them about the resolution and why it's important. And we provide analysis for investors about that as well. And then once it's at the meeting, everybody has an opportunity to vote. And then we are in touch with you afterwards to let you know what the impact of that resolution is. A lot of the companies we engage with, it's over multiple years, and we'll put resolutions each year and be back. And so that might be a long-term conversation that we might have with you if you were a shareholder in that company. Others, it can be easier for us to see the change that we need, and one resolution might do it. But no matter what, we stay in touch and we let you know what happened. So if you hold shares, there are a number of different ways they might be held. Something like being in a superannuation fund, and for example, I'm with Future Super, that's an example of indirect share ownership. So you receive the financial benefit of those shares, but you don't have control over what's purchased or how it's voted. That's up to the fund itself. So examples of that are, if you might work with a financial advisor, some of them have an arrangement where their fund is managed by what's called a custodian, And again, they take care of the purchasing and they take care of all the voting of the shares, and you just are the financial beneficiary of them. The other way to hold shares is directly, and that might be in your name. It might be in a self-managed super fund that you manage or are the director of, or it might be in a company or a trust or a foundation that, again, you are the director of. In this case, the shareholding entity, as it's called, is in your name or in a name that you control. You decide what shares are purchased or sold, and then you have the voting rights of those shares. So for this type of work and making use of your rights in this way, shares have to be held directly. And so that means that you're able to be one of the 100 shareholders who are able to put forward a shareholder resolution or proposal at a meeting. If you are an indirect owner of shares, such as through your super fund, really the options that are available to you are those that we talked about in the questions that were asked of Fiona. You can put pressure on your super fund to divest from certain stocks, or at least engage with companies on certain issues, or to vote a particular way on shareholder proposals. At ACCR, we don't do that kind of campaigning, but our friends at Market Forces often run superannuation campaigns, and there's a number of other organisations that do as well. So that's a good thing to look at and be a part of if that's your situation and something that you're interested in. However, if you do own shares directly, this is an option that is good for you, because as Fiona said before, different kinds of shareholders have different access to the company board, or to have meetings, or to make use of their rights in a different way. So that example difference between in Australia, where they do have access to boards, versus the US, where they don't, and shareholder proposals are a more important way for them to engage. It's the same for retail shareholders. So these type of shareholders are described as retail. So we're kind of the everyday people of shareholders, versus institutional, which is like a super fund or a very large fund. As a retail shareholder, participating in a shareholder resolution is a tool that we have open to us, as is attending an annual general meeting and asking a question. Whereas we can't have a meeting with the board of director of a particular company if an issue is important to us. So this is a really powerful tool that's available to us. I'll just put in a plug before we go to look at the Shareholder Hub, and I give you a bit more information there. For our last shareholder resolution for this calendar year, it's part of the Say on Climate initiative that we've been working on this year, and we have a number of resolutions like this up at other companies at the moment. But our final resolution for this year is to Incitec Pivot, and we'll be asking for them to commit to a Say on Climate, which means that they will produce a climate report to be considered by all shareholders in the company, and that shareholders have the opportunity to vote on, as they would the annual report or a financial report. We're also looking at putting a climate resolution on lobbying and climate lobbying, and we have similar resolutions at other companies this year as well. So if you happen to have shares in Incitec Pivot, we would love to have you join us. Feel free to send us an email afterwards as well if you have any particular questions about that. All right.
While we're on this topic, Emma, it flows in quite nicely because someone's just asked, do you advise on which companies you would like us to invest in to put resolutions?
That's an excellent question. We aren't a financial advisor and we can't give financial advice. That being said, we do have a lot of people in our shareholder community who will register their existing shares, but who also are purchasing shares that they align with issues that they're passionate about and that they would like to participate in a particular action. So I can't comment on how, I guess, financially sound such a decision would be, but if you were somebody for whom, let's take this example, climate and climate reporting at certain companies is an important issue to you and something you would like to see change on, I certainly, and it was something that felt right and possible for you, you absolutely could purchase a parcel of shares in that company to make use of your power. And that's something I do myself as an individual. I'll purchase a parcel of shares in a particular action that we're doing that's important to me. So if that is something that you're interested in, you're very welcome to get in touch with us and we can let you know what companies we're looking at. For particular actions, we already have many shareholders in. So to be able to put a resolution, we need 100 shareholders coming together. And for companies that we've been doing for many years now, say BHP, this will be our 4th year, I think, putting a resolution to BHP, if I'm remembering correctly. So we have many hundreds of shareholders in BHP, and that's also a very widely held company. But for something like Incitec Pivot, that's we've been engaging with them for many years, but this is the first time we'll be putting a shareholder resolution to them. So we have less shareholders, and that would be a company we'd be looking for more in. So it really depends on the company and the issue and how many people are already in our community who might hold that particular company, if we're looking for people who might be willing to purchase a parcel if that's something that makes sense to them. So again, if that's you, please feel free to get in touch with us. All right, let us go to the hub. Is that still sharing properly, Vanessa?
Yep, all good.
Wonderful. All right, so this is the shareholder area of our website. If you come to the main part of the website, it's just over here in purple. So if you see this shareholder purple, you know you're in the right spot. So as I mentioned before, to be able to access this tool and make use of this power, we need 100 shareholders coming together. And once we have that, we're able to put a resolution forward at the AGM. Generally, we're looking for over 100. And obviously, the more the merrier. That's the minimum. So if you have shares in any company, we would love to know about it. Equally, if you have shares in a company that we're not actively engaging with at the moment, it's still really helpful for you to tell us, because that informs our future engagements and allows us to go into meetings knowing that we might be able to put a shareholder resolution forward. So it's very helpful for you to let us know what shares you hold. So what you do is you come here and you can register your shares. We have a form that you can fill out. If you like, and if you have any questions, okay, you can put in your details and then just let us know if you'd like to arrange a call, and either Vanessa or I will call you back. But otherwise, if you're happy to enter your details, you'll go through to the next step of the form. The information that we collect is the minimum amount of information that we need to be able to put a resolution to the company. And that is your name, your email addresses, so we can stay in touch with us. It really helps us if you tell us how you found out about us. I might fill this out and we can do it together. Because Vanessa and I, another part of the work that we do is reaching out and looking for other shareholders or potential shareholders. And so if you let us know how you found us, that just helps us be better at what we're doing as well. So we'll say webinar, and I'll enter my information. All right, so it's the name of the shareholding entity. So that might be, for example, I hold shares in my personal name, or it might be, say I had a self-managed super fund. This is really important to get right, because this is what we use to double check that you're a shareholder in a company. And it's also what the company uses to verify that you're a shareholder and to see that you can be one of the 100 putting forward the resolution. You'll find this on a dividend statement, or when you first purchased your shares on an issuer statement. If you have any problems, let us know. But the more specific and accurate you can be with this, the easier it is for us, and it gives us a bit of a hand. The address associated with your entity, that might be your home address, or it could be a PO box. For people who work with a financial advisor, it might be the address of your advisor. So again, you should see that on any correspondence you receive from a company. The last 3 digits of your HIN or SRN. So each shareholding entity has a corresponding identification number. We don't need the full number, and that's quite sensitive information. So please don't tell us the full number. You don't need to. We just need the last 3 digits. And that's really helpful because we have a number of people who have multiple holdings, and that just allows us to differentiate between the different holdings. Also, each different HIN counts as one of the 100 shareholders. So you might be one individual, but say with 3 different entities, each with a different HIN. And that means you could count, say, 3 times if you held the same shares in all 3 companies. So that's a bit of a trick as well. And then if you can let us know what companies you hold, we've got here a list of the people that we've been engaging with on the issues that I mentioned. But if you have other holdings that aren't here, you can let us know about them as well, because as I said, it really helps inform kind of the future direction that the engagements might take if we know how many people might be willing to participate in such an action. If you have multiple shareholding entities, you can enter them here on the same form. Otherwise, you can just say, no, it's just this one. Sorry, because I haven't filled this in, it won't keep going. But the next step is to agree to allow us to keep this information safely and securely for you, and then to lodge a resolution on your behalf. And what allows us to do that is called an agency agreement. And I'll just show you what that is. So you can find the full terms of it on the Shareholder Hub. You'll also receive a copy when you agree to that form and let us know that information. What it is it's a weak power of attorney, and all it does is allow us to take that information, prepare a form, and then give that to the company to lodge the resolution. The only people who will know that you have participated in a resolution is us and the company, and that's never made publicly available. I'll just open it up. So there's a lot of technicalities here, and you're very welcome to read them in your own time. But basically, it's just saying that this is the way that this information is held, it's the way that it'll be used, and you can cancel the agreement at any time, and you can instruct either Vanessa or I to make a change to your information at any time, or you can log in and make a change yourself. So if anyone has any worries or particular questions about that, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, you're very welcome to look at that as well. Then what shall I tell you next? Are there any other questions before I go into the FAQs, Vanessa?
No questions at the moment, but I think it might be good to explain how the process of how we communicate with people just after they register.
No worries at all. So once you register your holdings with us, we'll send you a confirmation of the information that you've given us, and then you'll have a chance to change it or update it if we've got anything wrong. And then we'll be in touch with you again if there's going to be a resolution to a company that you've let us know about. So say you've registered your holdings, and we'll use my example of today, BHP. You have shares in BHP. If ACCR is looking at putting a shareholder resolution to BHP, we will then get in touch with everybody who is in our databases holding BHP and let them know about the resolution we're proposing to put forward. So registering your shares with us doesn't mean that you're automatically signed up to support a resolution at every company you've put down. It means that you have let us know so that we can get in touch with you if we want to put a resolution, and then you can choose whether you'd like to participate in it or not. I would say for about 95% of the shareholders who are registered with us in our community, support resolutions of all thematics and generally to any company that they might hold. We do have a small group of people who are passionate about a particular thematic and only are interested in participating in resolutions on that thematic. And so if that's the case for you, say we're putting forward, BHP is one that we've done multiple ones to before, so mostly climate and lobbying themed, although we have put resolutions to them on Indigenous cultural heritage protection before. And you might say that, oh, that issue's not for me, please don't include me in that one. And that's absolutely fine. And then we'll take you out. So you'll always have a good window of time to consider any particular resolution and then opt out of it if it's not for you. And that's absolutely fine. If a resolution, oh, sorry, Vanessa.
Just one question here about someone who's got multiple different HINs and they'd like to know how they can deal with that.
Yes, that is a very tricky thing and something that we've been trying to resolve in how we best store and look after everyone's data for people with multiple HINs. I think the best thing would be to fill out that form and say you'd like to have a call, and either Vanessa or I will help you put that in from the back end, because the form is set up to just take one HIN at a time. So to save you from having to fill it out many times, we'll help you do that over the phone. It can be a tricky thing that comes up sometimes where someone might have the same entity name and address, but a different HIN for every company that they hold. It's rare, but it does happen, and definitely will sneaky help you with that from the back end, I think is the easiest way.
Yeah, and hopefully when we do get a new form, that can be an issue that we solve in the new form where it becomes a bit easier to deal with it. And
Yeah.
We've just had another question asking about the minimum parcel of shares that we need to qualify to be part of resolutions.
Indeed. So the minimum parcel you need, or actually to participate in any resolution, you need to legally only own one share. But the ASX mandates that a minimum trade is $500 worth. And that might be any particular number of shares, depending on what the company. I think I can't remember what company now, but $500 worth was, I think, less than 20 units. And then I recently purchased Incitec Pivot shares myself, and it was 180 shares that got me to $500. So you need only own, or say if you actually have a larger position and want to divest, but then maintain a position in a company so that you can still participate in actions like this, you need to only own whatever the minimum parcel is, which is $500 worth. And once you've purchased them, it doesn't matter if the valuation slips below $500 worth, as long as you've got thereabouts. When you start getting down to only having one or two shares, so say you were divesting and you sold most, but just kept, say, one or two shares, every now and then, every few years, the share registry actually will just buy them back off you and clean up the register. So you do need to keep a minimum position to participate. If there's no other question, I'll just finish the train of thought I was on, if I can remember it. Yes, so if there's a resolution to a company you hold, we'll let you know. Say you decide to opt in and participate, we'll next be in touch when the resolution appears on the notice of meeting. And at that time, shareholders may want to vote their proxy themselves. So as Fiona was describing, once a resolution is up, everyone has an opportunity to vote on it. You might want to vote it yourself. Often, depending on the theme of the resolution, we might have other partner organisations or people from affected community who would like to attend the AGM to ask questions of the board. And then some of our shareholders are willing to offer their proxy to them so that they can attend the meeting. So at that time, we'll ask shareholders if anyone's interested in that, or if we know of anybody who needs a proxy, we'll help coordinate that. And then we'll next be in touch again after the meeting and after the results to let you know what that was, what the impact of it is, and what that means the next step is. I think we might send around our impact report in our email tomorrow as well. But it's good to keep in mind that often this isn't instantaneous work. It does take years, and it takes coming back every time and not backing down. So we are able to see a lot of change in company behaviour from just one resolution or one meeting. And you don't actually need to have a massive vote to see that change. Kind of anything more than 20% is a very sizable signal to a board that shareholders care about this issue. But over the years, and as time has gone by, and as people become more familiar with this work and boards become more familiar with this work, we're seeing votes of 50% upwards for some of our proposals. So it is increasingly powerful and driving more impact. And what?
We do have one question that's come in, Emma. What if we don't want to give you the HIN details of all our shares, but just ones on your list in which you are active that we'd like to be involved in? Can we do that?
Yes, you definitely can, whatever you feel most comfortable with. And if you're looking at the form and there is something like that you'd prefer us not to know, that's absolutely fine. And again, I'd probably pick the call option or send us an email first so we can talk to you about that. When we file the resolution, we don't need to provide the company the HIN, and we don't. And it's part of why we don't ask you to give us the full HIN number, because we don't need it, but it helps us to differentiate your different holdings and make sure that we have the most up-to-date information for you and then most up-to-date holdings. But if you don't feel comfortable with that and would prefer to restrict it to particular companies, we can absolutely work with you on that. I think the only other thing I'll say before we open it up to a few more questions, if there are any, otherwise we might have a little early mark, is about the frequently asked questions area. So it's got a lot of handy information in. There's a video of me explaining a lot of things, so you're very welcome to listen to that as well. Otherwise, if you prefer to read, we have questions about entering into the agency agreement and what it means, and that's what I've described to you tonight, about registering your shareholdings with us and that process, if you'd like to update your information, and then that process that I've described of participating in resolutions. So there's a lot of that information on the site already. The other thing that we're working on is that we really welcome your feedback of engaging with any parts of this process. Something we are always working on is how we can make this better and more interactive. And we're working with our colleague Luke to produce a new form currently at the moment. And then once that's in place, we'll be making some changes to this part of the website itself to include more information as well. But other good places to look is the research section and the news section, because we have a lot of our more detailed reports and they are focused more for investors. So those larger institutional investors like Fiona was talking about. But often Vanessa and I will try and repackage that into more accessible language for other types of shareholders as well. And then a lot of our media releases are here as well. So that could be of interest too. But I hope I've covered everything I said I was going to cover. Another thing is, if you don't hold shares, you're not interested, don't have any plans to, you can also support our work. We're a tax-deductible gift recipient, our research fund. So you are able to make a donation to support our work. And you can do that. Where is it? Down the bottom here. So you're very welcome to do that. It also really helps us if you just share information about our work with people you know or people in your life that might have shares as well. We're always looking for people who are interested, active shareholders to join with us to support this work. All right, I think I'll come back to our slide.
And we have a question about a proposal we put forward earlier this year about Woodside. They've asked, Woodside was very upset with the proposal put earlier this year and sought to change the rules about shareholder participation. Has there been any progress on that?
Oh, that's a good question. And we might have to check with some of our colleagues. But off the top of my head, well, nothing has changed legally about shareholders' rights to access this tool. It is a thing that happens from time to time, and I think really a sign of our success and the success of other organizations who do work like this, like Market Forces or like Colong Wilderness Foundation, that this work means something and signals something, and if it's upsetting companies and holding them to account enough that they're willing to be publicly cranky about it, I think it's a really good thing. But as of yet, 100 shareholders can still come together to put a proposal forward, and that is still a very good thing.
Peter says, great session. Thank you. Thanks for coming along.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Oh, we've got another question. Have you had any animosity towards ACCR for your activism?
We often do. It's really hard. And again, I think if we're making people uncomfortable, that's a really good thing. I think over the years, I've been with ACCR for 4.5 years now, I think. And when I first started, we talked about that and about that uncomfortability and holding people to account, because it wasn't really something that was happening in Australia on such a large scale until we really ramped up the last few years and Market Forces really increased their shareholder work as well. And I think as that has happened, there's been, I guess, more acceptance of this work as being a healthy governance measure for companies. In the US, it's seen that way. Shareholder activism has been happening for decades there, and it's now seen as a very everyday business as usual part of an annual general meeting and part of a company's kind of cultural governance. But here in Australia, we haven't got there yet, and it's still very uncomfortable for boards to feel that kind of scrutiny. But I think that's changing over time as this work becomes more normalized here, but certainly still it makes people uncomfortable, it makes people unhappy, but that's what drives change.
I think that's all the questions that we have.
Wonderful. Hold on, my partner's rustling. I hope so. That's wonderful. If you have any questions, other questions, do feel free to email us. We're very happy to take any other questions by email. If you have anything else for Fiona, if you think of something later, please let us know and we can pass that on to her as well. Otherwise, we'll be in touch tomorrow, Vanessa. I think if we're feeling very industrious, we'll send emails tomorrow.
We'll aim for that.
Yes, definitely by Friday, and we'll send you a few follow-up things. But absolutely be in touch, and we're so grateful that you've come. Thank you so much.
Thank you again for joining us. We hope you all have a lovely night, and we will be in touch.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.